work was when Natalie Portman was like this, lying down, and it was like, well, who's gonna look after her? Because I'll be gone and dying. And she's like, she won't be alone. It was so Harlequin romance. If you know Harlequin romance, it was so like. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Aftershow. I'm Nikki Novak, and I'm so excited because today we're going to be talking about Thor: Love and Thunder. Yes! We are going to be deep diving into the show, talking about all those details, and then answering the burning questions that the film left behind. Now, I should warn you, this is going to be a spoiler-filled conversation. So if you have not seen Thor: Love and Thunder, maybe go check out the film and then come back. Or if you enjoy that type of conversation, having everything spoiled, stick with us, but you have been warned.
Just look into the eyes of the people that you love. Not me. What?
I am so excited because I've been wanting to meet this person, talk to this person, content creator, tech whiz, person with the best haircut in Hollywood, Brian Tong. How are you?
Wow, Nikki, that's a lot to live up to, but I do appreciate the intro. So happy to be here, and I'm ready to jump in this with you. This is the first time that we've done something like this, so I am excited as well.
I'm excited too, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts about. I know I've sort of watched some of your videos before, and I've got your impressions on other films like Shang-Chi and other ones.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm so curious to know what you thought about this film. But before I get your opinion, Brian, we're going to talk about the critic score and the audience score on this film. The Tomatometer is 67% fresh, and the audience score is 81%. The critics' consensus is, in some ways, Thor: Love and Thunder feels like Ragnarok Redux, but overall it offers enough fast-paced fun to make this a worthy addition to the MCU. So now, drumroll please, Brian, do you concur with the critics or audience score or neither?
I, Nikki, concur with both, because when I saw the movie, I saw the movie on the premiere night, and there's a lot of energy around it. And it was fun, and it was like the first time, it's exciting. You're like, oh, this is a fun movie. And then I went to see it a second time, with the regular audience, and I like to see a movie twice because it kind of grounds you a little bit, gets you away from the hype. And I think the score is right, because if you go into this movie and you just want to have a brainless good time and just sit back and enjoy, it's fun. There's a lot of laughs. There's a lot of great visuals. But if you look at it from a critic's perspective of how the characters developed, maybe where they could have done a few different things story-wise that we'll talk about later, I think the lower critic score does make sense. And I wanted to actually see a little bit more evolution of the character, kind of like what we've seen with Iron Man's journey, Captain America's journey. I mean, those are big moments every time they had a solo film, and that's why they hold such high regard in the MCU. I don't think we got this from Thor. And so that's partially also why I feel like it missed in some ways as well.
I have to ask you now, are you a Gemini by any chance?
No, I'm an Aries. What makes you think I'm a Gemini?
Because we're very still. I'm a Gemini, and I have to watch everything twice. I also was at the premiere, and then I went to watch it again yesterday in a theater with a general audience, and I saw it in 3D because it was the emptiest theater, because every seat was filled, and I just tend to like my space. So I'm like, I guess I'm going to see it in 3D. I was a little bit reluctant, but I have to say, I was the flip of you. So when I saw it at the premiere, listen, I laughed so hard. I had so much fun, especially with the first 2/3 of it. Mm-hmm. But also at a premiere, I'm always a little distracted. I'm thinking about when I sit down, conversations I had on the red carpet and all that. So I always, especially when I've seen it at a premiere, need to see it again. And like you said, see it with an audience and sort of see their reactions. Because at the premiere, I was leaning heavily on the humor, because you're there to have a good time, right? Mm-hmm. You want to have fun. You want to hear the audience roar. And that's where you're going to hear it, was when, everybody's jacked for the premiere. But then the emotional beats didn't hit for me, because I was like, oh, forget the emotional stuff. I just want to have a good time. And then when I watched it in a theater yesterday in 3D, which, by the way, I highly recommend watching this movie in 3D. Bring back 3D. I had a better time with it the second time around, because the humor still landed, but I saw it more as a whole story and the evolution of the story. It felt a little disjointed when I watched it in the premiere, but I think that was just my brain just going in and out of focus. So I actually liked it better the second time around. And I tend to concur more with the audience. Overall, I feel like I like this pretty much on the level with Ragnarok. And I think part of the problem, we'll get more into it. I want to ask you more questions about this before I go too far into it.
We could just talk forever. So yeah, we do have to follow some level of like,
okay. So let me just say that the box office did great. It was 143 million at the box office domestically, the third biggest opening of the year, and 302 worldwide. So first of all, let's go more into the humor of it and what you thought of that, because there are sort of like, I feel like people are in two camps. They're either they love the humor of it because they love the Ragnarok aspect. They love that he might have even gone further with it, but then they felt like they didn't like the drama side, or vice versa. I've heard a lot of people say to me, oh, I like the drama, or I like the drama aspect of it. I thought the humor and the silliness got in the way. So which side were you on?
I mean, this is one of those few movies when you ask if I'm a Gemini, I think it honestly almost comes into like, what's your frame of mind going to this film? Because everything we talk about on both sides of the coin of this movie, I completely agree. Like, so first of all, if you loved Ragnarok, I think you're going to be bought into the Taika style, the Taika humor, which there's a joke on top of a joke, and then the third person gets in on the joke. And sometimes that can be fun, and sometimes that can be tiring. And I don't blame either side for which perspective they take. I think the humor, for me, I enjoyed it. I laughed my ass off the first time. You know, the second time, obviously not as much. And I'm kind of just, seeing it a second time. And I'm like, I don't know if this is a movie that I could watch multiple times like I have a lot of other MCU movies, quite honestly. I think like 2 was good enough for me. But the humor does... you want to feel good when you come in, but then it's almost so much. They do humor in like semi-serious moments. They drop a joke in serious moments that then when they actually try to get you the serious emotional stuff, you're kind of off balance and you're almost expecting it to go in another way because they've done this the whole movie. And then you're like, oh, this is actually an emotional time where I do need to lock in and pay attention. So it's hard for me to say whether it was bad or good, because there are times where I loved it and there are times that I didn't. And I think that is reflected in the score. But from a box office standpoint, I mean, I believe this is the best performing Thor movie of the 4 up to this point. So that hasn't hurt it. And like you said, third best box office movie of the year so far. So people are watching and enjoying it. We'll see how that long tail happens. But I'm more of the side of the humor hurt it a little more than it helped it for me.
So tell me like your favorite comedic moment and maybe one that didn't work.
Oh God,
for
that's
you.
so hard. Favorite comedic moment. I mean, I think the intro was I think when Thor's doing the splits between 2 motorcycles and holding that pose extremely long. I mean, that probably got the biggest laugh out of me. I mean, that's ridiculous. And you're like, oh, that's like Taika saying like, we're here, get ready, buckle up. And so I love that moment. The ones that don't land, I think there was too many Korg. Like Korg always had to say something between whenever their jokes. He like always did. And so Taika, this is his movie that he directed. Taika also made sure he put a lot of himself in the movie too. But this is his movie, so I can't complain about that if that's what his vision was. So I think that sometimes Korg messed up the emotion and some of the scenes because there was too much of them.
Well, there wasn't enough of him in some scenes because he was just ahead, which I don't know if I loved that part of it. Like I was a little disturbed by it. I thought, I don't know if I'm enjoying just Korg just being ahead. I'm curious how that all came about because it didn't really service the story in any way other than in the Zeus scene when Korg's head was tied to the back of Tessa Thompson's head. That was hilarious, I thought.
Thor, making the mustache and everything.
Yeah. And if we're talking about favorite moments, hands down, that was my favorite scene. I thought Russell Crowe as Zeus, which I heard Taika say in an interview recently, that they had him film 2 takes of every single part of his performance, once in a British accent and once in his quote unquote Greek accent, and they showed it to test audiences, and hands down, and that was Russell Crowe's idea to do sort of like a bad Greek accent. I thought he crushed it. On top
he
of that,
he was really fun.
I loved the humor in this movie. I thought Chris Hemsworth, and I said this in my Twitter reaction after I saw it the first time, that I think this is Chris Hemsworth's best performance of any film he's ever done. And people were coming at me going, how can you say that? Because I think a lot of times when people say best performance, they immediately think drama, that you have to go to drama to be rewarded for like a great performance. I've never seen him more comfortable, more in his element. He's clearly Taika's muse. They work so well together, even better than Ragnarok. I just felt this comfort in his skin. Like he's never looked better. By the way, some of those arm shots had to be CG.
Ridiculous.
There's no way that he was that big. And I don't really care. I'm not a washboard ab person or an arm person. I don't get
You sure about that? You sure about that, Nikki?
I promise you. I have my moments, but I definitely had my moment with Chris Hemsworth in this one. I was like, oh my God. But I thought the Zeus, that whole scene was hilarious. But I also loved Chris Hemsworth sort of when he was sort of forlorn about his ex, which was the Hammer, the Mjolnir, being like coming in and sort of like all of that, all of those jokes, and then his current Hammer getting jealous. I thought that all landed. Okay, so I've gone on enough about how much I love Thor and I love Chris Hemsworth. What did you think about his performance? And his
I had no idea that you enjoyed Thor and Chris Hemsworth, the character, Nikki. Look, I think if there's any A-lister in the entire MCU that is like, you know, the one that has the biggest on their shoulders, figuratively and literally, it's Chris Hemsworth. I mean, no one personifies Thor better than him. I can't think of a single actor in the entire world universe that could be Thor. And we've seen him, you know, they talked about actually in the past after Thor Ragnarok, like, hey, he has a lot of range. You know, he does comedy really well, but he has a lot of range. And I thought we got to see more of that in him dealing with Jane, specifically at the hospital when she had cancer. I was like, oh man, like I felt goosebumps in that scene. Like that is so important for us to be able to see him do that, just moving forward, knowing if there's big stakes at the table that we can see this from Thor, who sometimes comes off as a bumbly musclehead, but who actually has a real heart inside of him. So incredible work by Chris Hemsworth. I think that also, let's not forget when he does these scenes between Stormbreaker and Mjolnir, he's talking to inanimate objects, like grazing by his head or sitting on a table. And it's some of the funniest stuff in the film. So it just shows how much range he has. And I loved everything about his performance. And there's nothing that he did wrong. He is Thor. Crushed it. The one, and I'm probably not going to make myself very popular saying this, the one comedic performance that didn't land for me was when Natalie Portman's character told jokes. And she didn't do it often, but that scene where she's like, I'm trying to come up with my catchphrase. Yeah, that didn't totally land for me, but she's not known to be a comedic actress. Like I forgave her for it because I thought she was awesome in so much of the rest of it. But if there was any humor that didn't work for me, it was unfortunately her. I thought all the other humor landed for me. And I actually wanted I would have even loved if it carried on to the end because the end got quite heavy. So what did you think of Natalie's performance? Well, you know, being someone who, again, I know these movies are made for a general audience and not for like, it is derivative of the comic book stuff. But I thought, you know, I'm a big comic book geek. I mean, I read the storylines of Gore, you know, the God Butcher and Mighty Thor before this was any movie stuff. So I thought that Natalie Portman's performance, the strength that she had and the vulnerability was incredible. I actually kind of wanted to see a little bit more of her journey to give more gravitas to it.
That's interesting because I thought the exact same thing. I almost thought that this should have been a 2-film arc for her character. And maybe technically, you know, she only signed on for one, so they put it all into one story. But I really felt like maybe the drama of it would have landed more had we really built up and sort of maybe not had, you know, her pass away in this film, maybe in the next film. And in this film, almost have there, because we didn't see her in Ragnarok, right? So we hadn't really seen those two together as a romantic couple. for a while, a good number of years. And when they kissed and got together, I almost felt like it was too easy. Like I got because he made a joke in the beginning saying, she's like, how long's it been? And he says 8 years and 2 months, and he knows exactly to the minute. But I wasn't sure if I still saw why she was into him. There wasn't time to sort of build that relationship. It was all very quick. And so then, to see her come into her own, and I thought her scenes as the mighty Thor were amazing.
Oh, insane. They're freaking awesome.
Freaking awesome, right? She looked amazing. She just owned it. And I just thought I would have liked to see more of her owning her power, and then maybe in the next film see her demise. And then they would have had more time to build on that humor. I don't know how you feel about that, but yeah. So tell me a little bit about, so how did you feel? Like you touched a little bit on Christian Bale's performance as Gore. And I'm just curious how you felt it worked, how you felt it didn't work. And given that you're so familiar with his story in the comics, what maybe you would wish they would have leaned into more from the comics?
So I think right off the bat, he doesn't get enough time in the movie to show just how savage he is. We see him kill that first god. We see some gods die here and there, but he his history is brutalizing the gods with reckless abandon. I mean, he spends a little bit more time with the kids than he does butchering gods. And I think that would have brought a lot more gravitas to it. The reality is that, and again, this is not for, in the comics, it takes 3 Thors from 3 different timelines to try and even defeat Gore, the God Butcher. Like, that's how big of a villain, and that's how much power and fear he strikes into it. Is it Omnipotent City? Is that where Zeus's scene is?
Omnipotent, yeah. I think so, yeah. I wrote that one down too.
Right? I was like, so when that whole scene happens, they're not even intimidated by Gore. They of course they overlook what's happening, but we don't, as an audience, see enough of the brutality and power of Gore the God Butcher. Thanos had his time over the course of several movies and over a buildup of movies for us to fear him.
Right.
But I think that we needed to fear Gore more, and at the same time, Christian Bale's performance, one of the best villains we've ever seen in the MCU. Like, his range, showing his displeasure and how he was hurt and betrayed by the gods. I like that intro off the gates to establish, when you establish a villain in the beginning before the actual movie, you at least get their motivations going. So I thought that was great. But Christian Bale was fantastic as Gore the God Butcher. There's obviously like stories about how they changed his look. He was fine. He looked great. He was scary as hell. But I think they really needed to make that to make the death have higher stakes. They needed to develop Gore more than they did.
Okay, so now I want to ask you about the end beats of the film, because we did get some drama. How did you feel about the way that the film wrapped up Gore's arc and sort of where Gore ended up in the film in general?
See, I believed, because Christian Bale is so good at acting, I believed his turn emotionally, right? We talked about it a little earlier. I just wanted to see more from him to make that scene feel like we had more of a history with him that happened, to maybe even another nod to some sort of interaction with his daughter that really nails that home. But when he basically relinquishes him from being a selfish person, wanting to kill all the gods, I felt maybe we just need a little more something to know about how he really came to that decision in those few moments. But Christian Bale is incredible doing it. So it didn't feel like forced or out of place. So I loved everything that I saw there. And also just how the fact that, right, so Christian Bale's daughter, it's all about love. Thor becomes the uncle to, I guess, the manifestation of his daughter, who is now has the powers of eternity in her to shoot purple laser beams out of her eyeballs. I think the whole crowd, when they showed that last kind of monologue and it said love and thunder and they both jumped in the air, like, that was a really good feel good moment. That was heartfelt. And so I don't know if we're going to see her in future films. I mean, it would seem she has the power to hang with superheroes in this MCU, but I don't I don't know if we'll see her. It is, I mean, I didn't know this until recently that was actually Chris Hemsworth's daughter playing that role. And once I found that out, maybe if I don't want to know everything before I go in a film, but maybe that would have changed even just emotionally how I felt about it. But now when I look back at it, I mean, those are awesome moments. So we'll see where she comes into play in the MCU. I don't think it'll be a big role, but I thought it was just really satisfying that the title of the movie tied in the fact that it was her and Chris Hemsworth together and jump in, and it was awesome.
You just gave me chills. You just gave me chills, because when you finally find out years later from when they announced the film who the love was in the Love and Thunder, that was brilliant. I love that it was his daughter. Whether or not we're going to see her again, I think highly depends on how much Chris Hemsworth's daughter wants to be an actress, because I think we could see it moving forward. I don't know if it was one of those things like, look, but I thought because that is his real life daughter, they had great chemistry. I thought she was amazing. I didn't even realize it was his daughter until I read that later. They don't necessarily look alike. So I was like, oh my gosh, who's this young actress? She's really great. She's got a real strong presence. I love the scene at the end. I thought the way that wrapped up. The only part for the film that didn't work for me was the last scene with Vale. And I'll tell you why, because it got dramatic. No, not just because it got dramatic, because how did he shift on such a dime like that? Like, it was basically like, Thor was his enemy throughout. He hated the gods. That was his whole motivation. And just at the very end, Hemsworth is like, choose love. And he's like, okay, cool. Okay, let's do that. And then the moment that really didn't work was when Natalie Portman was like this, lying down. And it was like, well, who's going to look after her? Because I'll be gone. I'm dying. And she's like, she won't be alone. It was so Harlequin romance. If you know Harlequin romance, it was so like, oh, drama. I was just like, she was dying. And she's like, oh, he'll look after her. It'll be cool. And he's like, cool. This arch enemy is going to take his love, his daughter that motivated him throughout to be filled with so much hate because he lost her and hate the gods so much. It just was too quick. That part did not work for me at all.
That's why I was like, I said, hey, could we have seen just one scene that might have given us a little inside that, or like an Easter egg that would have led to that decision in that moment, right? That's all we needed to see for us to buy it, more. I think the other thing that maybe the directors will say is like, but he was infected by the Necro Sword and was not in his right mind when he hated Thor all that time. And so now that it left his body, I'm just making this up, and if I was, being interviewed about this, it left his body, so therefore he was more rational in those moments because that was the real Gore we saw, not the infected Gore, God the Butcher. But I still didn't. You're right. Everything you said is right.
I mean, it was still Bale. He was still Gray. It was still Portman. It was still Thor. That moment for me, I was like, that seemed comedic. That seemed comedic, but not intentionally. That was the comedy that did not work for me in the film. The rest of it was just fine.
See, that's why I told you. Oh, go ahead.
Can I just say one more thing? Chris Hemsworth, can we give him one shout out for not leaving the MCU? And he's like, I'll do another film. I'll do this role for 20 more years if you need me to. Like, Evans is like, I'm out. I need a really good reason to come back. Robert Downey Jr. tapped out a long time ago. He's just ready to go for more.
Hey, I mean, we've seen, this is by no means comparing the franchises, but the Fast and Furious keeps calling that cast. Hey, Marvel keeps calling Chris Hemsworth. He's going to keep showing up.
He is the Vin Diesel of the MCU.
You better be careful there. 20
years from now, Hemsworth will be saying, we're family. That'll be his catchphrase in the MCU. And he'll have like the Russell Crowe dad bod.
It's going to happen. It's already written. And
I will be there for it. Anyway. But yeah, I also agree that, so I'm curious because again, you're so much about the comics. You've spent so much time. Like this is in, according to the Tomatometer, like in the lower, like I think the bottom 4 in terms of the score in the MCU. Going into this film, not knowing what was going to happen, but knowing the comics, what were you do you understand why the score is lower? And what were you sort of hoping to see overall? What were you expecting to see that you maybe didn't?
Well, we like kind of touched upon. I mean, I really think this is two movies for two different audiences. As a fan who loves the MCU, I think you're going to rate this pretty high, quite honestly. But as a critic, you're probably going to be a little like, where's give me a little bit more meat and potatoes along with the comedy, right? I think that's where the score falls.
Let's talk about some of the other characters. So Valkyrie, Tessa Thompson. What did you think of her? I thought she had the best moment in the film when they were in with Zeus and she went to one of the handmaids and sort of like kissed her hand. I thought that was the best moment in the film. That was hands down my favorite. I thought it was so much fun. She is incredible. The camera loves her. Everything she delivers, she doesn't seem like she's trying too hard. She doesn't seem like she's reaching. She's just cool and she's a great actress. And every time she was on screen, my eyes went to her. What did you think?
Man, I fell in love with Tessa Thompson when I first saw her in Creed.
Yeah.
I fell in love with her. And I think that because I feel this way about Tessa, I wanted more Tessa. I think that Valkyrie should have been in this movie more. I know there's so many different elements, but was based on how the movie was set up with the characters in focus. Yes, it was awesome. And sometimes when you have a character like Valkyrie who doesn't get enough shine, you want more. And that actually bodes well for the future of what they could do with her character. But I wanted to see more of her in this movie. I just want to see more of her in general. Even clearly she was bored being king of Asgard on Earth, doing all the political things and doing Old Spice commercials. And she just wants to go out there and kick some ass. And we want to see her kick some ass. And she has that like confidence and that sass and that strength. And she's a badass. So do I want to see more badass Tessa Thompson? Yes. And I hope that based on how people have reacted to her role here, saying like, we want more, that they deliver on that down the road.
I don't know why they haven't announced her own standalone film yet. I'm so surprised that hasn't happened yet.
She could carry it. She could easily carry it.
And everybody loves her. Like she's proven herself and she shines in every single, no matter which MCU film she's in, she's always been a standout. Like people have always talked about her. Did you miss Loki?
Oh, who doesn't miss Loki? I mean, I think that there's something, it's like peanut butter and jelly, like Thor and Loki. That's where we've gone to in the MCU. But Loki has his own thing going on.
Yeah.
It'll be fun when they bring them back together. I think sometimes you don't want too much of a good thing.
Right.
That PB&J is really good, but I don't need it every day. But I think that Loki and what's going on with the multiverse and the timelines, they will eventually come back together. And when they do, it's going to be awesome. So it's okay that Loki wasn't in it, but do I miss him? Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot, and you've referred to this like Thor Ragnarok. When we talk about that movie, I think part of it is also that movie kind of came out of nowhere. It changed the tone of Thor. I mean, it reinvigorated the complete Thor franchise. It brought you even talked about like a new flavor, a new texture to the MCU where you can have a space that is jokey and safe. So I'm not saying get rid of that, but just the way that Thor Ragnarok was built, the visuals because of Sakaar, the off-world where Hulk was, World War Hulk, or was, Hulk the Warrior was happening. That visually, musically, and comedic wise was kind of like, this is Thor. And I think it partially was, in a way, maybe Taika was trying to capture some of that, but also not. And it made it hard. Like people feel like, oh, it was a little bit of a redo of Ragnarok, but it wasn't. You can't replicate everything that Ragnarok was. And if you tried to, it would seem less impactful. And maybe some of that Thor Ragnarok shine, because it was so great, maybe people were like, oh, okay, I've seen some of this before. It didn't feel as fresh because that movie came out of nowhere from the MCU.
See, I think, and I've been wondering this ever since I saw this film. If it had been reversed and you had seen this film before Ragnarok, I wonder how people would feel, because I think when something is lightning in a bottle and you've never seen anything like it before, we had never seen that type of humor in the MCU with the exception of Guardians, but Taika has his own style of humor and flavor. So to see all of a sudden, if we'd seen this film first and Ragnarok second, how would people be reacting? Because sometimes when it is that powerful and that lightning in a bottle, it is really hard to follow up. That said, some of the visuals and some of the opening scene I thought was the best scene in the entire movie.
It was badass.
The goats. And apparently the goat sound came out of a Taylor Swift meme because people thought it was Taika's voice, but somebody had heard the goat sound and they were initially going to have those screams. every time it got me, even towards the end when it was getting dramatic and they, crash landed. It worked. It worked for me every single time. I love Taika's humor. I think if I'm going to say anything about this film in terms of structure and storyline, I think maybe the transition from comedy to drama isn't seamless. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think he can do both, but maybe the transitions and how it flowed wasn't as seamless as Ragnarok. But other than that, I thought, like I said, I loved the comedy just as much, if not more.
Do you think though the transition was harder because they really went like so hard to the comedy? Because when I watched Thor Ragnarok, I loved it because it's new, but it didn't feel like they were forcing too many jokes. I felt like in this movie they were pushing the joke on the joke, where in Ragnarok there was the joke and it was funny, but here in Love and Thunder there was the joke and then they would add another joke on top of it. And so that's where I think it might have been a little extra. But what do you think about the fact that because it was pushing so hard in comedy that it made it harder to transition into more dramatic stuff?
I think with Ragnarok, you had way more of the Avengers and you had each of them sprinkling in humor. I think the humor fell on the shoulders of fewer people in this one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Chris Hemsworth does with Thor is magic. He's amazing. And
he is Thor embodied. He's awesome.
And was it Chris Evans who recently said, there is nobody else could have played this role. And he's truly great. I think maybe it's because it's not embedded in the sort of phase 3 MCU that we're used to. And so I think, Marvel's finding its way with these new movies. And I think, those past ones, they were building on a story, right? Like there was an end game. This sort of feels like its own movie. And I do believe, I have a lot of faith that all of these movies in phase 4 are going to eventually come together. Shang-Chi, Eternals, this one, I think they're all going to come together because they're planting little seeds of how it's all going to come together in the end. But I think it's harder when it's not it doesn't feel initially like it's part of like a whole storyline. I felt maybe Thor Ragnarok felt like it fit into the MCU more. So maybe there was more of story that was continuing, where this is just more of like its own little one-off and it didn't necessarily connect to the larger picture in the MCU. So maybe that's why.
I think you're touching on a great point though, because, when we talk about the connectedness of the story, some people are, you hear some buzz of, are people MCU fatigued right now, right? Like, are people tired of this? Look, the movie's still doing great numbers. So let's not, I would say, I think those are a little played up to maybe, get some clicks. I don't think people are tired per se, but I think what you're seeing in the MCU is that because we haven't had a clear direction of where exactly we're going, whether it's, this new Secret Wars direction or whatnot, people forget though, when the MCU was establishing itself, it took basically the first 5 years to establish these characters, to give them enough threads and connectivity for us to then buy in. So if we look at this phase 4 as kind of like the second generation reboot, we need to get to know these characters a little bit more from a standalone standpoint. I think, yes, we know Thor a lot. We know Doctor Strange a lot. And maybe because we didn't feel like, hey, those are types of movies where maybe we would see more of that connective tissue, and it didn't happen. Maybe sometimes people are disappointed. I think another trend that's happening, because we haven't seen this, at least everything right in our face laid out of where Kevin Feige and the MCU want to go, is that people kind of get even more excited about the end credit scenes than they do about the movie at times, just kind of wondering what's that next thing. The MCU has built this huge hype train and fandom that everyone just wants to know the next thing. And when they don't give you the next thing, a la where is the MCU going, they feel a little bummed. And then instead they lean on like, this cameo is great. And some people are like, dude, it was just a cameo. Where are we going? So I don't think it's fatigue. I think it's really people don't exactly know. And I think this is a good thing. They don't exactly know where the MCU is headed yet. And once they feel like, oh, okay, I'm on board with this, then I think it changes the tone of these movies. And right now, do they feel disjointed? Yes. But I also remember Iron Man 3 was not very well received, but the trauma that Tony went through in Iron Man 3, if you watch it again years later, plays into the future. If you watch Age of Ultron, which people didn't like when it came out, but now you see the establishment of Scarlet Witch and her journey and other aspects of the relationships in there. People now say, oh, I actually enjoy Age of Ultron more because of where the stories went. So I think that until Kevin Feige lets us down, which they haven't, we need to give them the benefit of the doubt for creating this epic 24, 25 plus movie franchise that we all love, and wait for the pieces to fall instead of having a knee-jerk reaction and being like, this sucks, or I just care about the end credit scene. I think that's the wrong way to look at this.
I think you make excellent points. And yeah, if you hear about any sort of Marvel fatigue, I've actually really enjoyed Phase 4 in the sense of I've enjoyed these one-offs. And I enjoy sort of speculating as the films wrap up, how they are all going to fit together in the bigger picture. And I fully believe that when we get to the end of Phase 4, everybody's going to be like, oh my gosh, I did not see that coming. They tied Eternals into this and into that. And I really think that they're laying the seeds. I don't think it's as laid out, like you said. It's a little more obscure at this point. And they're starting.
That's okay.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think it's okay. And I think we are going to see it tie together. In Kevin Feige, I trust. So let's talk about the mid-credit scenes, because you touched on it. So what did you think, first of all, about the fact that Zeus is still alive? I'm all on board with that. I'm so happy. Like, yeah, give me more Zeus.
Come on, I'm on board with that for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So the end credit scene where Zeus is alive and repairing his somehow thunderbolted chest that went through his entire body. And the thing about it is, like, I had to actually watch the movie twice, honestly, more because there are times where I didn't really hear what Zeus said in the premiere, because not only are people laughing a lot, like, it's kind of hard to understand, like, because of you saying he's doing a trash Greek accent. So if you're gonna do that, you have to like listen. So the second time around, it made it easier to understand him as well. But the reveal of him, basically saying people don't look at our gods anymore; they look at superheroes more, and it pisses him off. And he brings in Hercules, but not just Hercules. We're talking Brett Goldstein from Ted Lasso. And what's interesting, like, at the premiere, people went buck wild, but I think at the general audience, because not everyone has seen Ted Lasso, but everyone hears about how amazing that show is, I don't think people understand how genius that casting for someone to go mano a mano with Chris Hemsworth, and that humor and that gravitas, how genius that casting is going to be for Hercules, who historically in the comics, they were rivals. They actually had beef over Jane, like, as a love interest. They end up becoming friends and bros, but that's an evolution that we're going to be able to see on screen of Hercules coming to kick Thor's ass. They're both cocky. We know they both think they're the greatest gods because they're both sons from gods, Hercules from Zeus, Thor from Odin. So whatever happens in Thor 5, I think that dynamic is going to be special, and you always need someone to play off a hero to make the movie that much greater. And I freaking can't wait for whenever that happens. That could be bonkers.
Bonkers. I agree. I'm a Ted Lasso fan. I love Brett Goldstein. I love his performance. He's my favorite character on the show, especially in the last season. I just think he's incredible. And I was same, like in the premiere, I was like so excited and everybody went crazy. And then, like I test a lot of what I sort of like, because we're all in this business and we all understand a lot and know a lot and watch everything. I asked my nephew, who's 11 and is an MCU fan, what'd you think of Hercules? And he's like, who is that guy? He doesn't watch Ted Lasso. So he doesn't know. He had to explain who it was. And he was like, cool. Like, he's on board with it. But it wasn't, of course, when you watch it with an audience, you don't get that like, whoa, you're kind of like, the people are yelling. You're like, you watch Ted Lasso, and you over there who aren't reacting, you don't watch Ted Lasso. But I agree 100%. I cannot wait to see where it goes. Now, when you just mentioned in the comics that they sort of fight over Jane, that's something that I'm not going to get to see. That I would love to see.
I know. And unless she somehow comes back, but I don't think it's going to happen in that form. But it would have been, you had the, I mean, sometimes I forget, like, the whole Mjolnir and Stormbreaker love triangle. I mean, that was funny. That was stupid. It was so
Loved
stupid, but
it.
it's so funny. It was
so
so funny.
good.
And so, yeah, and so it was so good. And so to have another love triangle, but this time between actual characters, I thought that dynamic could have been really interesting. I mean, that's obviously not where they're going, but yes, Brett Goldstein for Hercules, incredible.
So you know this. So from the comics, they become bros. How are they going to move the story forward, though? Do you think in the next Thor, given that they've teased that Russell Crowe's character is still alive and he's kind of a joke, like Zeus is kind of a joke, and I grew up studying the Greek gods. Zeus was no joke. So how are they going to move that story forward? What would you like to see for Thor 5?
Well, this is kind of interesting. You said, right, Zeus, we know Zeus is not a joke. Does that kind of, I feel that there's that camp is like, why did they make Zeus such a joke, right? Do they almost need to rehab him to show how powerful he is and how intimidating of a force he can actually be, instead of doing baton tricks with the Thunderbolt?
Now,
Yes.
what if he went from dad bod to god bod and Russell Crowe gets in sick shape for Thor 5 and he realizes because his son abandons him and teams up with Thor, he needs to own it, and he totally revives the Greek gods.
We can go that way. I mean, I don't know who the villain would be yet, but if Zeus was the villain, they're going to need to do a lot more with him, right? I mean, he's too silly and funny right now to be taken seriously as a villain in my mind, right?
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the end credit scene with Jane. What did you think about that, Brian?
Ooh, so I think what Marvel has been doing, which is really smart, is keeping the players on the chessboard. And they may not be doing this with villains as much, but you know, Jane arrives in Valhalla. She's like surprised, and we're surprised too. We're like, oh dang, she's still quote unquote alive. When you don't see a body, they're still alive. And if we see them talking on camera, they're definitely still alive. So I thought it was awesome just to see not only her, but see Idris Elba there, and the fact that we've now taken a sneak peek at Valhalla. We did not see, though, Odin or Loki in that scene. So who knows? Are they there? Are they not there? I'm just throwing it out there. At least they weren't in that scene in any way, shape, or form of reference. But the fact that Jane is there and that Idris is there means that we could potentially see them down the road. Natalie Portman hasn't signed on for another Thor yet, but there's so much to do with the character, whether it's bringing them back in some capacity or in the comics, quite honestly, after this whole, after Jane dies, Thor actually brings her back to life with the power of Mjolnir. And in case you didn't know this, she becomes the next Valkyrie. Now, she may not be the next Valkyrie because Tessa Thompson is still there, but she could be something. So I'm just throwing that out to viewers that there's no way she's off the table yet. And I love how, who knows, maybe she just shows up in a crazy cameo and they access Valhalla and we're like, oh my God, her and Heimdall and whoever. And that would be a moment. But
yeah. I heard somebody say, oh, but you're supposed to go into Valhalla, you're supposed to have died in battle. And she wasn't technically in battle when she died, but she was still arguing with Gore, or sort of like verbally pleading, in battle, pleading with, so that technically she is in Valhalla, but maybe she's not in Valhalla. But
or the gods showed her favor because of her service as the mighty Thor. Right. Well, these are the movies, right? So there is no such thing as a technicality, especially in comic book movies where everyone is alive until they're not alive, which is why Tony Stark's death meant so much, right? But she's still on the table. I mean, would you like to see more of her?
Oh, 1,000%. Like I said, I didn't think that I got enough of her in this one. I wanted to see her own her powers longer and have like a longer arc in terms of watching, and she can kind of do it all, right? She can do the powerful, she can do the emotional stuff. And she and Hemsworth have great chemistry together. I've always thought that, even from the first Thor, they were one of like my favorite MCU couple, because I thought they were really kinetic on screen together. I thought they were really great. So yeah, I would of course like to see. Any theories about, where it might go, knowing that you know the comics so well?
Well, I mean, that's all what I told you is basically what happens in the comics, but maybe she comes back not as the Valkyrie, but as one of the Valkyries. And we know that her and Tessa Thompson have such a great relationship in the movies, and they've got a great vibe going on too. That makes sense as well. But that's all that really the comics have in store. It doesn't mean that we're going to see it on film. Like I said, it's a reference point. But every time you talk about, I wanted to see her more, I mean, she basically had like a 30-issue arc that showed off what she was really capable of, showed off her kind of emotional struggle with being transforming between Mighty Thor and dealing with cancer. Like, we kind of only saw that transformation once. And yes, you could say, well, that illustrated the point in the movie, but I think we need to go through a journey with these characters a little longer. And I really loved the idea of you saying this arguably could have been a 2-story arc with both Gore the God Butcher and Jane, in order to really flesh this out and make these things more meaningful. Because even someone like Hela, Kate Blanchett, like, she died she was an incredible villain. Like, she needs to still be on the table, if you ask me. And so I'd prefer, as things have gone on, we've started seeing this in small ways, like Baron Zemo from Captain America and Winter Soldier, Falcon and Winter Soldier. He's still on the table. And I think that we need to see these villains not just die after one movie to have the idea or the thought that they're still out there in the world, because that's also a comic book thingy.
Yeah. There's like a 4-hour cut according to Taika. Would you want to see it?
I think here's the thing. I know you do, because you were like, and I'm not, this is the thing. I don't want people to get misconstrued and think that I didn't like this movie. I enjoyed it, right? But there's things that I wanted to see more of. I think you'd be all in on the 4-hour cut. I'd be a little concerned, because even before this, I had friends in the industry tell me like that had actually seen the longer version. He's like, oh, you didn't see it all. I mean, there were reports that there was a dance routine with like Jeff Goldblum and Peter Dinklage. We didn't get the Lena Headey scene in the movie as well. That was talked about a lot, but because of story and direction, like, that's what I'm saying. When I hear all these things after the fact, I'm like, could we have just taken some of the jokes out to put more meat and potatoes in it? When you hear about some of these things, of course, a dance with Jeff Goldblum and Peter Dinklage is not meat and potatoes by any means. But I think the 4-hour cut would be fun. But it might, as me who loves the movie and still enjoys it, I might get frustrated being like, wait, like, where was the other stuff that could have been put in here? But it would be fun. It would be fun.
Well, he called it Monty Python-esque. So I think it would get even more absurd, but maybe it would feel more connected. And I think, he did say that he was like, it was weird, because he said there is a 4-hour cut that he would want people to see. And yet when people asked him about the Jeff Goldblum, Peter Dinklage scene, he's like, oh no, that had to get cut out. I'm like, why did that have to get cut out? But you're willing for people to see the 4-hour cut. He was like, no, it wasn't good enough to make it into the film. So it was a little bit of a contrasting opinion.
I think that this 4-hour cut, that obviously stuff comes up in interviews, I think that was totally just like the assembly cut. But like I said, friends who see the dailies, I don't bug them I wait till after the movie, because I don't want to know anything about it, quite honestly, going in. I want to know about the stuff after the fact. But after the movie came out, he said, oh, they cut out a lot of stuff because it was way too jokey. I'm like, wait, that Taika is going to push it. I'm like, but when I hear someone that say there were even more crazy random jokes in this movie, I'm like, that would have been too much. I mean, some people might say like it would have been too much. It would have been too much. I don't want to say that this was like almost like a satire of a Marvel movie, but in some cases it was, like when Lady Sif was dying on the battlefield, and he's like, it was at first serious, and then he's like, oh, your arm will be in Valhalla. Like, that was funny, but it was like, dude, like, that's when I knew I should not take anything in this movie serious ever. When that scene happened, like, it was funny.
Well, if this gives you an idea of where his head is at, he apparently, what it said at the very end, Thor will return. Apparently, he and Hemsworth both went, it will? No one told us. Like, no one even had talked to us about Thor 5 yet. And then he said, right. And then they said, well, would you be interested in Thor 5? And he said, well, only if he was doing no battle and he was on like a family vacation, like it was called Nebraska or something, would I be interested in doing a Thor 5? And I'm like, this is why I love him, because you know what? He's like a palate cleanser. He cleanses my palate, and I'm like refreshed after I see his sense of humor in the MCU. It doesn't need to necessarily make sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. It's Taika.
I think we're going to wrap up this chat. But I want to thank you so much for joining. This has been a blast. I got so like involved in talking to you. Like I couldn't even remember my talking points. We were just like flowing and going, and it was such fun. Thank you for joining. Can you give yourself a well-deserved plug and let everybody know where they can find you?
Yes, thanks, Nikki. Basically what I do is I kind of cover everything in the tech, geek, and space culture, tech and geek space area. So if you're into iPhone reviews, or you're into the latest movie reviews and how those might blend, or even like behind the scenes of how they made Raya, I do a lot of different things like that. And so if that's your jam, come on, hang out. It's just youtube.com/Brian Tong, and you can find me by my name and all these other places, but that's where you can find me. So thanks for let me do the plug.
I've seen your videos and they're fantastic. You have great energy. Again, best hair in the business. You have like it's almost like a thunderbolt. I so love chatting with you.
Yes,
it's so perfect.
It was great, Nikki. Thank you so much. We'll do it again. We'll do it again. Thanks so much.
Have to do Thor 5.
Which will be your number one movie again. I'm pretty sure about it. I know how you are. I see. I get you now.
You totally get me. Thank you everybody for watching, and I hope you guys had fun deep diving into Thor: Love and Thunder with us, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye.